It's a Spotify podcast.
You pushed me down, thought I'd stay on the ground, counting me.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Resilience Radio Deep Dives. Rabbit Holes Deep Dives. Sorry. Tonight, we're talking about the brain that learned to speak again. Imagine sitting at your computer. You open an email. You answer a message. You move the cursor. You browse the internet. You join a video call. You talk to someone you love. You work. Nothing about that sounds extraordinary until I tell you something. The person doing these things can't reliably control his body the way you can. His speech has been devastated by ALS. And some of the words appearing on that computer aren't coming from his fingers. They're coming from an electrical activity recorded inside his brain. Not metaphorically, literally. Electrodes implanted in his motor cortex record neural activity associated with his attempt to speak. A computer analyzes those signals. Machine learning algorithms decode them, and words appear. In June of 2026, researchers published something in Nature Medicine that quietly changed the brain-computer interface story. This wasn't a demonstration lasting 20 minutes. It wasn't somebody sitting inside a laboratory surrounded by researchers. It wasn't a carefully edited technology demo. One man had used an implanted brain-computer interface in his own home. For more than 3,800 hours, over 19 months, nearly every day, he communicated more than 180,000 sentences. He browsed the internet, sent messages, joined video calls, controlled his computer, and maintained full-time employment. Think about that. A technology we've spent decades treating as experimental was becoming part of someone's ordinary day. But there is another side of this story. Because the moment people hear electrodes, brain, AI, words, they naturally ask a much more uncomfortable question. Can this thing read your mind? And the answer right now is important. Because no, not the way you that phrase makes you imagine. This system isn't sitting silently inside someone's brain reading whatever thought happens to pass through. The participant intentionally attempts to speak. His brain prepares the movements that speech would require. The interface learns patterns associated with those attempting movements and translates them. That distinction matters. But it also opens a much bigger question, because technologies rarely remain exactly where they began. So if a computer can already translate attempted speech directly from neural activity, where does communication end and thought begin? And who gets to draw that boundary? Welcome to Rabbit Holes Deep Dives. We read the research. We look at what actually happened. We compare the breakthrough with the headlines. And our goal isn't to tell you whether the brain-computer interface are wonderful or terrifying. It's to understand what they can actually do and what they cannot do, and what questions we should probably start asking before the technology gets much further. Because I think we may have crossed a threshold. Not the moment computers learn to read minds. Something more practical and maybe more important. The moment a brain-computer interface started becoming useful enough to leave the laboratory. The man who could speak without speaking. ALS is a brutal disease. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis progressively damages the nerve cells controlling voluntary movement. Walking can become difficult. Using your hands can become difficult. Swallowing can become difficult. Eventually, speaking can become difficult or impossible. But here's the part that matters in our story. Losing control of the machinery used to produce speech doesn't necessarily mean losing the ideas you wanted to communicate. Imagine that. You know what you want to say. The sentence exists. The joke exists. The answer exists. The question exists. The memory exists. But the pathway from the intention to the muscles to sound is failing. That's the problem researchers have spent decades trying to bypass. And if you think about it, that's what a brain-computer interface really is, a bypass. Normally, if I want to type something, my brain creates the intention, neural signals travel through my nervous system, muscles in my hands move, my fingers strike keys, the keyboard detects those movements, the computer receives them. That's a long chain. Brain, nerves, muscles, fingers, keyboard, computer. But what happens when the middle of that chain fails? What if we can move the interface upstream, closer to the source? Brain, computer. That's the dream. And researchers have been pursuing versions of this dream for decades. Some systems detect brain activity from outside the skull. Others place electrodes directly into the brain tissue. The closer you get to individual neural populations, the richer the signal can become. But invasiveness comes with obvious trade-offs. Surgery, medical risk, hardware changes, long-term stability, regulation, and one enormous scientific problem. Brains aren't keyboards. There isn't a neat little key inside your cortex labeled hello. Another labeled good morning. Another labeled open email. Neural activity is distributed, dynamic, noisy, in different form from person to person. So the machine has to learn. That's where modern machine learning enters the story. The participant attempts to say something. His speech motor cortex generates patterns associated with that attempted speech. Electrodes record activity. Algorithms analyze those patterns. The system estimates what he was attempting to say. Then words appear on the screen. That's extraordinary. But here's something I want to make very clear. He is attempting to speak. This isn't arbitrary mind reading. The distinction will become important later. For now, there's another problem. Even if you can make his words once, can you make it work tomorrow? And then the next day? And 6 months from now? Because that's where brain-computer interfaces have historically run into one of their least glamorous but most important problems. The brain changes. Signals drift. Electrodes change. The relationship between recorded neural activity and the decoder can shift. A demonstration is one thing. A device somebody depends upon every morning is another. And that is where this particular experiment becomes much more interesting. Teaching a machine one person's brain. Think about the difference between a race car and a family car. A race car can do extraordinary things, but it may require mechanics, constant tuning, special conditions, a professional driver, a controlled environment. That's fine if the purpose is providing what technology is possible. But nobody wants a communication device that needs a pit crew every morning. For years, this has been one of the problems facing high-performance implanted BCIs. A research team can collaborate equipment, adjust algorithms, troubleshoot connections, monitor sessions, fix problems. But clinical technology eventually has to survive something much harder than a laboratory. Real life. Tuesday morning. Nobody from the university is standing there. Something updated overnight. The user wants to send an email. That's the standard. And if that's what makes this 2026 study important, researchers weren't simply asking, can we decode attempted speech? Previous experiments had already demonstrated remarkable performance. They were asking something closer to, can this become usable? Can someone operate it repeatedly for months in his own home without researchers constantly supervising the system? The participant initially used the ACI during research sessions. Those sessions, strike that. The participant initially used the ACI during research sessions. Those sessions required research oversight. Then the study protocol changed. Care partners were allowed to handle basic setup without scientific team being present. And something happened. Usage exploded. Before independent operation, average use was roughly 3.7 hours per day during the limited research sessions. After independent home operation becomes possible, average use rose to about 9.5 hours per day. 9.5 hours. That number tells us something laboratory accuracy cannot. The participant wanted to use it. He chose it as his primary communication and computer interface over the study. His accumulated more than 3,800 hours. He used the system on 444 out of 653 days. He communicated more than 180,000 sentences, nearly 2 million words. Researchers reported an average communication around 56 words per minute. And in structured prompted testing, the speech decoded achieved word accuracy above 99% from a vocabulary containing more than 125,000 words. Now, be careful with that number. 99.2% does not mean every spontaneous conversation was decoded perfectly. Structured testing is different from unrestricted natural communication. In real-world use, errors still occurred. Corrections still mattered. The participant could rate decoded sentences. The interface provided tools to fix mistakes. That nuance is important because technology stories often take the best laboratory number, strip away the testing conditions, and turn it into a universal claim. We're not going to do that. What matters isn't that the system was perfect, because it wasn't. What matters is that it became useful. Useful enough for messages, useful enough for video calls, useful enough for browsing, useful enough for work, useful enough that someone living with severe paralysis chose to operate it for thousands of hours. And that's a different benchmark. There is also something interesting happening underneath the software. The system continuously adapted. Instead of requiring long manual strike that. There is also something interesting happening underneath the software. The system continuously adapted. Instead of requiring long manual recalibration sessions every day, The decoders could use new information gathered during operation to maintain performance. In other words, the person was learning the machine, and the machine was learning the person. Think about the relationship. A prosthetic hand replaces a mechanical function. A wheelchair replaces mobility. Glasses correct optics. But a learning BCI is different. Its usefulness particularly emerges from an ongoing relationship between biological neural patterns and adaptive software. The interface isn't merely manufactured, it's trained, personalized, redefined. That raises an interesting question. At what point does the machine stop being a generic medical device and start becoming part of one particular person's communication system? Because the decoder trained on your brain isn't simply interchangeable with mine. And now we reach the moment that makes this study different. The researchers stepped away. The participant goes home, and the experiment becomes ordinary life. When the laboratory door opens. Scientific history loves dramatic moments. The first flight, the first moon landing, the first atomic chain reaction. But some technological thresholds are quieter. Nobody cuts a ribbon. Nobody counts down from 10. The machine simply becomes useful enough that people stop treating it like an experiment every minute they're using it. That's what caught my attention here. Thousands of hours, months, home, work, conversation, not perfect, not commercially available, not proven in thousands of patients, but real enough to become routine. The participant used the BCI to communicate with family, friends, colleagues, clinicians. He used email, text messaging, video calls, professional applications, recreational computer access, and he maintained full-time employment. That's an important transition because independence isn't measured only by whether someone can move a cursor across the screen. Independence is being able to decide what you want to do and do it without waiting for a research team. The system even included something you might not expect: a privacy mode. When enabled, the interface could prevent data logging. I want you to remember that because we'll come back to it. Now, this is where enthusiasm needs restraint. This was one participant, just one. That matters. We don't know from individual how reliability the same performance generalizes across different people, different brains, different disease progression, different implant positions, different homes, different caregivers. The hardware was not invisible. Care partners still assisted with putting equipment on and taking it off. This is not a consumer product you order online. It remains in investigational technology. Surgery is required. Long-term implanted electrodes create medical and engineering questions. Portability still needs improvement. Regulatory approval is another enormous step. Cost matters. Insurance matters. Training matters. Support matters. And even if the technology works beautifully, who gets access? A system can be scientifically revolutionary and clinically inaccessible. Those are not contradictions. Both can be true. That's why I think saying BCIs have solved paralysis would be ridiculous. They haven't. But saying it's just another laboratory experiment would miss what happened too. Because a laboratory experiment that becomes someone's primary communication interface for thousands of hours is telling us something. The question is what? Maybe we're watching a transition from proof of concept to assistive platform. And once a technology becomes platform, different questions appear. Who builds it? Who maintains it? Who owns the software? Who owns the neural data? What happens when a company disappears? Can a medical implant require a subscription? Can software updates change someone's ability to communicate? What happens if algorithm update makes the decoder worse? Who is responsible for incorrectly decoded sentence? The patient? The manufacturer? The AI? Nobody? These questions sound futuristic, but notice what's happening. They're becoming relevant because the technology is becoming useful. A terrible technology doesn't create complicated ethical questions. Nobody cares about who owns the data from a machine nobody uses. Success creates the difficult questions. And the biggest one is the question everybody's asked first. If the machine can decode words from the brain, can it decode thoughts? The privacy of thought. This is where we need to separate science from science fiction. The system in the study does not demonstrate arbitrary thought reading. The participant actively attempts to speak. That attempted speech produces neural activity associated with preparing and generating speech movements. The decoder translates those patterns. That is very different from silently sitting beside someone, turning on a machine, and reading whatever happens to be passing through their mind. We do not have evidence that this system can do that, and that distinction matters enormously. Think about typing. When I type a sentence, you can read what I choose to type. That does not mean you have to access to every sentence that I considered typing. Attempted speech BSIs operate much closer to communication intent than to unrestricted internal thought. But here's where the rabbit hole opens. Technology doesn't freeze. Today's capability doesn't automatically tell us tomorrow's boundary. Neuroscience is getting better at identifying patterns. Electrode systems may improve. Machine learning models may improve. Training data sets may grow. Sensor density may increase. Non-invasive imaging may improve. So instead of asking the sensational question, can they read our mind? I think we should ask a better one. What categories of neural information should be legally and ethically protected before technology becomes capable of decoding more of them? That's a much more serious question because neural data is unusual. Your browsing history describes what you clicked. Your location history describes where you went. Your purchase history describes what you bought. Neural recordings originate inside the biological system producing intention itself. Even if today's decoder captures only one neural task related of information, the data category deserves attention. Who owns it? The patient, the hospital, the researchers, the device manufacturer. Can it be retained? Can it be anonymized? Can it be used to train future decoders? Can someone withdraw permission later? Can neural recordings become part of a medical record? Could courts subpoena them? Could insurers ever request them? Could employers? Could advertisers? Some of those scenarios may be ultimately be prohibited. Some may never become technologically meaningful. The point isn't that they're happening now. The point is that legal frameworks work best when they're written before the worst case scenario becomes profitable. And there's another psychological trap here. Fear can distort the conversation in both directions. People frightened by technology may exaggerate what current BCIs can do. People excited by technology may minimize the future risk because today's systems remain limited. Both errors come from confusing today with tomorrow. The evidence says tomorrow's device can restore remarkable communication capabilities to a person with severe paralysis. That's real. The evidence does not establish unrestricted mind reading. Also real. And it is reasonable to begin discussing neuro privacy before unrestricted mind reading exists. All three statements can coexist. That is intellectual honesty. But privacy isn't the only philosophical problem. There's identity. Imagine you used a neural interface for 10 years. The decoder has adapted to you. You've adapted to it. It predicts your attempted words. It corrects mistakes. It helps you communicate at conversational speed. You use it for work, friendships, arguments, jokes, love, apologies. Your digital voice emerges through an algorithm trained on your neural activity. Is that device merely a tool? Your phone is a tool. Your keyboard is a tool. But this one sits much closer to intention. Does that make it different? Maybe, maybe not. Humans have always extended ourselves through technology. Writing externalized memory. Telephones extended speech across distance. Glasses altered perception. Cars extended mobility. Computers extended calculation. The internet extended access to information. Maybe BCIs are another step in that same story. Or maybe moving the interface from the hands to the brain crosses a meaningful line. We don't know yet. But there's one more complication. The technology was developed to restore lost ability. What happens when people without disabilities eventually want it too? Where does the human end? Return to the man sitting at the computer. There's a temptation to make him a symbol of some distant cybernetic future. I don't think that's fair for him. The immediate value is much more simpler. Communication, autonomy, work, connection, the ability to express what he already wants to express. That's the human center of this story. The machine isn't inventing his thoughts. It's helping those thoughts cross a damaged biological pathway. And maybe that's why this moment matters. Brain-computer interfaces have spent decades existing somewhere between medicine and science fiction. Every new demonstration immediately gets dragged towards one of those extremes. Miracle or dystopia. But real technological change usually lives in an uncomfortable middle. A system can restore independence and create privacy questions. It can be medically transformative and commercially immature. It can deserve excitement and regulation. It can empower one person without proving universal effectiveness. And it can decode intentional neural activity without reading arbitrary private thoughts. Maybe maturity means holding those ideas simultaneously. Now think back to the beginning. Naomi, strike that. Maybe maturity means holding those ideas simultaneously. Now think back to the beginning. A man opens an email, moves a cursor, joins a call, talks to his family, works, ordinary things. That's what makes him extraordinary. This historical threshold may not be the day a computer first decoded neural activity. That happened earlier. It may be the day somebody stopped needing a laboratory around him to use it. Because once technology becomes part of ordinary life, the questions change. We stop asking, can it work? And start asking, who gets it? Who controls it? Who owns the data? Who pays for it? Who maintains it? What happens when it fails? What happens when it improves? What rights follow the user into the interface? And what happens when medicine designed to restore human ability begins creating capabilities that people without disabilities want too? Those questions are coming. But we should be careful not to let the future erase a person standing in front of us today. Right now, the most important thing, this technology wasn't to create a cyborg. It helped a human being communicate. And maybe that's where our thinking should begin. Not, how do we merge humans with machines? But, which human establishes are so fundamental that restoring them justifies building entirely new interfaces between biology and technology. Speech, movement, vision, memory, and eventually, what happens when the same interface can do more than restore what was lost? That's where this rabbit hole leads us next. Because once information can move directly from neural activity into a computer, the boundary isn't technological anymore. It becomes ethical, legal, economic, psychological, and deeply philosophical. Where does the human end and the tool begin? Maybe we've been asking that question since the first human picked up a stone. The difference now is that tool is listening to the brain. What evidence would convince you that a brain-computer interface has crossed from assistive technology into something fundamentally different? What neural information should always remain legally protected? Should neural data belong exclusively to the person whose brain produced it? Should you accept an implant if the restored an ability you've lost? Would you accept one if it gave you an ability you'd never had? And perhaps the hardest question, if the technology eventually becomes capable of decoding something you never intended to communicate, should the machine be allowed to listen? We don't have that machine today, but perhaps the time to answer that question is before we do. If today's episode made you think, don't stop here. Read the research, study the history, examine the original documents, listen to the experts, listen to the critics, listen to people who disagree with you, question the sensational claims, question the official explanations, question the headlines, question the experts, question your assumptions, and question mine. Because Rabbit Hole's Deep Dive isn't about handing you a conclusion. It's about following the evidence, even when the evidence leads somewhere uncomfortable. When the evidence changed your thinking, which claim deserves more attention? Investigation. What did we miss? What assumption should we challenge next? And what rabbit hole should we go down next? Share this episode with someone willing to examine the evidence. Join the conversations. Challenge the ideas respectfully. Keep asking questions, because every answer opens another question, and every question leads us further down the rabbit hole. Put all your comments in the oh shoot. What is it? The comments below. Challenge the ideas respectfully. Keep asking questions, because every answer opens another question, and every question leads us further down the rabbit hole. Put all your answers in the comments below. I read all of them. My name is Leroy Nellis, and this is Resilience Radio. Godspeed, stand for the Constitution, and never surrender your ability to think for yourself. God bless, and good night. Hey everybody, I wanted to sit down with you today and talk about something we've been working on behind the scenes for quite a while now. First, I want to thank you. Whether you've been here from the beginning or you just found the channel recently, I want you to know that I genuinely appreciate every single one of you. Every comment, every conversation, every suggestion, every word of encouragement has helped shape what Resilience Radio is becoming. This isn't just my channel anymore. It's about a community. And because of that, I wanted you to hear these changes directly from me. Over the last several months, we've been doing something a little unusual. We've been studying our analytics almost obsessively. Not just YouTube analytics, but the analytics coming from Naomi, the AI production system we've been building from the ground up. We've been asking questions like, what videos do people come here for? What keeps people watching? What topics naturally fit together? And what happens when we mix very little types of content on the same channel? After looking at thousands of data points, we came to one conclusion. It's time to let each series become a very best version of itself. So today, I'm excited to announce that Rabbit Holes is becoming its own dedicated YouTube channel. Rabbit Holes deserves its own home. It's where we dive into mysteries, history, unsolved questions, and rabbit holes. Strange events, forgotten stories, and all of those fascinating topics that make us lose track of time. By giving Rabbit Holes its own channel, YouTube can better understand who those videos are for. Our AI can learn from much cleaner data, and we can build something truly special for people who love those deep dives. Resilience Radio will continue doing what it has always meant to do, help people understand themselves through psychology,
You pushed me down, thought I'd stay on the ground, counting me out like the numbers didn't matter. But pressure builds diamonds in the dark, and I've been sharpening my edge in the chatter. Every scar turned into strategy, every setback fueled my clarity. I took the hits, learned the game, turned my losses into flame. Now I'm coming back stronger, and you'll remember my name. I'm rising through the fire.